video, I'm going to show you how you can warp up your frame loom in a really quick, easy way. So we're going to take our warp yarn and we're going to place it into that first notch on the top bar, and we're going to just wrap the end in and out of a few notches just to make sure it's nice and secure, ready for weaving. You can always give it just a little bit of a tug just to make sure it's held in place before we start. You are then going to take that warp yarn and you're going to place it down into the notch on the bottom bar and then bring it back up to the top, and we are literally going to bring it up and down all the way across the frame loom. Now you can decide with your project, you don't have to work full width every time. You could decide, actually I'm just going to make a small sort of 10cm project, so you can decide how wide you want your warp to be when you're deciding on your project. Where we are working full width on this piece, we're just going to gradually work along, working up and down with that yarn, filling up all of those notches. So when we get close to the end, we are going to then just do a single thread on that last one, and then what we're going to do is we're going to start coming backwards. So we're going to bring that thread back into the previous notch and we're going to start doubling up our threads. The reason why we're doubling up the threads is because with the weaving we want the warp yarns to be really nice and close together. Sometimes what happens if your warp yarns are too gappy, so if we'd left it just coming sort of one direction across the warp, there are quite large gaps in between the threads, and this can mean that your weave isn't very stable. So by doubling them up like we're doing now, it means that we're going to create a really nice and stable weave. The yarn that I'm using today is a nice rug yarn. It's 80% wool, 20% nylon, and the nylon just gives it that added strength that we need because we want a really nice strong warp. So we've worked our way across, doubling up those threads, and what we want to do is we want to match what's happened on the other side. So we've got a single thread, so we're just going to place it into the notch before the last one, so we've got two nice even single threads on the end, and we're going to take that thread and like we did at the beginning, we're just going to wrap it around again a few notches just so it holds that yarn nice and securely in place. Once you've wrapped it around a few times and it's nice and secure, we're then just going to take our scissors and just trim that thread as we don't need that loose end. Now we need to get our reed in place ready for weaving. So to do this, because our warp yarns are really tight, we're just going to loosen off the bolts on that top bar. I tend to loosen it a little bit and hold on to it at the same time because sometimes it can ping back a bit further than you think. So just hold on to it, loosen those bolts and then re-tie it up once you've loosened it off a little bit, and then do the same at the bottom. So release it off, holding onto it, release the tension a little bit, and then redo those bolts back up. When we've loosened off those warp threads, we're ready to put the reed in. So we're going to start by putting this through at the back of the loom, and you have to put this through at a bit of an angle just to allow yourself to sort of push it in, and then we're just going to raise it up to the top. And as you can see, some of the warp yarns have already sort of started to go into place, but we're just going to have to adjust these slightly because we want to make sure that they go into the right holes. So where we had the single thread, we're actually going to leave one little notch before we put in the first thread. So we put the first one in, leaving a gap of one, and then gradually we just put these into the gaps. Sometimes you have to give them a little bit of a push. If it's particularly sort of a thicker yarn, sometimes they can get a little bit caught, so we just have to give them a little squeeze just to get them into place. Whilst doing this, we want to make sure that all of our warp threads are coming down nice and straight and nothing's getting caught or twisted. And now we've got it all into our reed, we need to double check that tension again. So we want to now re-tighten everything. So we're going to loosen off those bolts, pull everything nice and tight, and then re-tighten them back up. And we'll do again the same at the bottom, just double checking that everything's nice and tight to get it all ready for weaving. So that's it, we've warped up our frame loom, we've checked that that tension is nice and tight, everything's nice and even, and then now we're just double checking the reed, that will rotate to open up those warp yarns. Sometimes it can get a bit sticky, so we just help those free, and then, as I said, we are ready to weave.